Welcome back to the Lift Free and Diet Hard podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Coates. Join me along with industry leaders and friends on a quest to get more people through the gym door and eating and living healthier. Join me where evidence meets empathy while rejecting fitness industry fads and extremism. Let's begin.
Brianna Battles, it's awesome to have you back. It's been too long. You are the CEO of Pregnancy and Postpartum Athleticism. Love that combination. You've got a master's in coaching and athletic administration, certified strength and conditioning coach, a lot of badass credentials. Great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Let's go right into it. This is what I've been doing. So, quote, athleticism does not end when motherhood begins. What does that mean?
Yeah, that's become the tagline through the years of working with a lot of different female athletes through pregnancy and postpartum. I think we've had to combat a lot of a lot of messaging where I think being an athlete and calling yourself an athlete seemed to be something that expired after age 22. Like when you're done playing in college, or maybe if you went pro in some capacity, well, by the time you're 25, you're not really an athlete anymore. But we've seen a cultural change with our female athletes and women that are extending their athletic careers, that are starting families and still competing at a high level. And then even just recreationally, how women train now is so different than how they were training 20 years ago. I remember I was one of the few women in any weight room when I was in in college. And the reason I had exposure to that is because I played Division I. So I was in that circle, but there was not a lot of 20-something-year-old women lifting weights, not that long ago. So it's been interesting to see that just how women train now is actually really athletic. We don't have to really convince people as much to lift weights and to train athletically. Like that is already bought in. We've seen the fitness industry explode, especially being online. But the information for pre and postnatal is exceptionally outdated or designed solely for Gen Pop. And that's not applicable for how female athletes train. And I'm not just talking about high level athletes. I'm talking about the moms that go to F45 and they're pushing sleds around, they're going to Orange Theory and they're sprinting on the treadmills. We have women that are doing half marathons and really pushing the pace. Women are training differently, and that's a great thing, but they need to be supported through pregnancy, postpartum, perimenopause, menopause, and beyond. And that's why athleticism does not end when motherhood begins. Those are catalyst seasons for everything to come.
Why is the research and information outdated?
Because a lot of research just isn't done on women, especially, or if it is, it's very much trying to convince us that exercise is healthy and beneficial, but it's really limited. It's saying your heart rate volume or your VO2 max might increase. Cool, that's great information. But where the research significantly lacks is looking at postpartum, and it's looking at performance implications. It's not just is running safe? Well, sure, running is safe for mom and baby. There's no cardiovascular risk or anything like that. But I think the gap is then in the conversation around pelvic health. And there's a lot that we just don't know, because that's high impact on the pelvic floor when the center of gravity has changed. Running is already a really high injury sport. And now you add 40-ish pounds on them. Their gait changes, everything changes. And then that's just a lot of repetitive force on the pelvic floor. So again, it's not is it safe or unsafe? It's just, there's not really a span of considerations. And that's what I've focused my work on, coming from a strength conditioning background, being a female athlete who I have two boys myself. And I train and compete in a lot of different capacities, and I'm working with a variety of female athletes at all levels, from our Olympians and MMA athletes to, again, the moms at F45. It's a lot of the considerations are the same, just dialed up or down.
I have a theory, and I want you to context this. So yeah. One of my frustrations is that some doctors will blanket recommend that pregnant women do not exercise. My theory is that no one wants to talk about miscarriage rates. I literally just had a message just before we got on air that one of a woman who's part of my ecosystem had to delay a start of a program because she just had a miscarriage, right? So if I'm not mistaken, I think miscarriage rates are probably in the 30-ish% of pregnancies range. Is that correct?
Yeah, a lot of women have miscarriages for sure. And
no one talks about it.
No one talks about it. And I think there's a stigma to the general public that exercise or that you like did something wrong and caused the miscarriage, but we have no
Yes.
evidence to support that. No evidence to support that. And it is not a mother's fault. Like miscarriages are very common. Um, and it's really a struggle. And a lot of people will say, I needed to take time away from exercise, or maybe if they get pregnant after having miscarriage, they're going to approach that pregnancy with a lot more caution. Not because not because we necessarily have evidence that exercise is dangerous, but because of the mental and emotional stress that it causes, where you don't want to be second guessing anything. And so we just have to like navigate that with a lot of emotional intelligence.
And my theory is that doctors will tell women not to work out during pregnancy because it, quote, covers their ass because miscarriage rates are so high. And it, someone might say, well, you let me work out, working out may have led to this. And then the doctor is theoretically liable. Whereas if they say, hey, don't work out, then therefore you remove the stimulus. And if a miscarriage happens, a doctor can say, well, I told you not to work out, so therefore I'm covered on that end. Do you think that's part of what's going on? And is there any added depth to that?
I mean, maybe. I think that could definitely be a theory in some cases. And I think that we see the flip side too, where it's like, oh, well, you're a CrossFit athlete. Well, just keep doing what you've always done. You're clearly very fit. Or yeah, you can keep squatting. So it's either my experience, over a decade ago, my first pregnancy, and still with so many of the clients that I work with, is they're told by their doctors either just like listen to your body, keep doing what you've always done, or well, don't lift over 20 pounds, don't get your heart rate over 140 beats per minute. But again, that is not supported by any evidence, and it's not practical either.
What is the evidence actually saying? What should women do?
Well, a lot of it is to have a good cardiovascular baseline of fitness that they can lift weights. And again, it's all like vary through the scope of what's safe for baby. And exercise is safe for mom and baby. We know that. Like the ACOG is very supportive of exercise, but it doesn't consider core and pelvic health of the mother. It's much more focused on baby safety versus the performance or physical implications to the mother. And that's where I come into play. It's like, yes, like I of course want you and your baby to be safe. Of course. There can be different like predispositions that somebody has or contraindications to exercise. Yes, and that is where doctors, we absolutely need their scope and guidance there. And I'm not going to override that. But again, my focus is going to be supporting a woman's lifetime of athleticism. And that means being able to reverse engineer the process, just like we would if we're trying to get an athlete to peak at a certain timeline. We know, okay, in February 2026, they want to be making a run for X, Y, and Z race, event, fight, whatever it might be. And okay, and then when she's due to have her baby on this date, okay, and then we just keep reverse engineering the process and what her body's going to need in order to accomplish that goal, whether it is a professional like athlete or it's just somebody who's like, I would love to keep running because I love running and I want to keep going back to CrossFit because I love CrossFit. Okay, cool. Then let's train in a way that gives you your best chance to be the athlete that you desire to be and raise your kids that way because it's part of your value system. And let's do so in a really strategic way because there are so many variables that we do not have control of in pregnancy, delivery, birth, postpartum, and motherhood. We just don't have control. You can do everything right and shit happens. You can do everything wrong and you're just fine. And wrong is all relative, right? Like it's not a black and white thing. There's no specific formula to follow, but that's not how coaching works. But unfortunately, the pre and postnatal industry wants to say, do this, don't do that. This is safe, this is unsafe. And that's just not practical, especially when you work with female athletes.
Is it too individualized to give some general recommendations here, or do you have any things that you want to say, pay attention to this?
Yeah, I mean, this is where we could talk forever because I think there's a few different factors here. The first thing I have somebody consider when they are maybe in the trying to conceive season of life, they're thinking about maybe becoming a mom. I think motherhood in general exposes all of our BS, whether it's physical, mental, or emotional. all of it it's so raw. It gets so exposed. So maybe that is a history of eating disorder, body dysmorphia. Well, that certainly gets highlighted when you start to see your body change through pregnancy. And now you're like being forced to gain weight. And it can be really triggering for any woman who has a history of being hyper aware of her body, of her nutritional intake, and of what she looks like. It is very hard for that identity shift to occur and to see those physical changes to your body. So that is like one thing, is to start taking initiative of like, this is not how you actually want to live. This is not what you want your experience to be. And so if there's still work to do from the inside, this is a good time to start thinking about it. If a woman has core and pelvic health symptoms to begin with, most of the time that would be if they're peeing when they lift really heavy, or when they jump rope and they've done that at their CrossFit class, or when they power lift and that's something they've always experienced, which can be very common for a lot of female athletes, whether they've had babies or not, to pee under that high stress situation, whether it's like heavy load or a lot of volume of running or jumping. So that would be something that I would encourage them to address either early in pregnancy or pre-pregnancy if they have it, and they can do that with a pelvic floor physical therapist. A lot of times it's just sort of re-coordinating that system. It's not that their pelvic floor is weak. Absolutely not. Most female athletes, it's not a result of having a weak pelvic floor. It is a system that is not coordinated and matching like the task to the demand. So those are a few things. It's just like the mental, emotional side, that athlete brain, being willing to adapt, just really hard, because we see a lot of people that want to I want to keep competing. I want to keep racing. I want to keep pushing it really hard. I want to keep hitting PRs at the gym. And it kind of comes down to like risk versus reward. And I know that sounds kind of extreme, but it's more of that like self check-in. Is like, just because I can do something doesn't necessarily mean I need to right now. Because again, it's not about ability. It's not about like, are you fit enough or are you able to? Is this serving the state my body is in right now on behalf of where I want to be later, postpartum, when it like actually all kind of matters. That's what we're training for, is the other side. You are already fit enough for birth. You are fit enough for delivery. It's a matter of like preparing your body to just be really adaptable instead of rigid in your approach. So again, like instead of giving these guidelines that are like, stop running after blah, blah, blah weeks. Yes, we can have like rough timelines of that. But overall, if you address that athlete brain, that mental, emotional side of things, then you will experience the byproduct of a really informed, really strategic, strong, healthy, and fit pregnancy. But you got to address the BS first.
And this is one of those things where, as you alluded to, we could talk all day. So, and this is what you do. So the reason why I bring guests on here is to introduce you to people. And if someone listens and go, okay, cool, this is interesting, good to know. But then someone else is like, oh my God, I need to do the deep dive. Then, and we'll give the resources at the end. So that's why you're
on like how to adjust exercise during pregnancy, where it does say like you may want to start modifying this movement around this point in time. And again, it's not a rigid timeline. Same with postpartum. There can be a lot of like crossover there. But overall, a lot of it is just, it's training in a way that is willing to adapt to what your body is experiencing and changing. So again, as your stomach gets bigger, you're going to have a diastasis. That's very normal. If you start having pelvic health symptoms, you want to start modifying. And even if you're not having symptoms, you want to train in a way that's not going to aggravate that, because you're not fragile, but you're also not invincible. And I think in the female athlete circle, we just assume you can be a badass and just kind of keep doing what you've always done. And sometimes that backfires. And as a coach, if I'm working with an athlete, I'm going to give the recommendations I can to help give them ultimately the best experience in all different categories on the other side.
I'll give a tactical example from my experience coaching. Over the years, 14 years, I have trained a few, not a lot of pregnant women, but a few. Yeah. And especially into third trimester, your center of mass changes. So your exercise selection often has to reflect, especially with things like squat motions and hinge motions. Your weight is displaced differently.
It is. And I mean, it really we can break it down to be fairly simple. Like your stance might need to widen, your range of motion might need to be shortened. That's fine. But it's also looking at, and I actually outlined this whole methodology in my coaching certification, because I found that it's so much more than like, do this or don't do that. It's more of a way of like assessing the situation, assessing the person in front of you, So we're going to look at 5 different factors. First is breathing. We're also going to look at pressure distribution. Then we're going to look at tension. Then we're going to look at their position. And then we're going to apply it to the movement that they're in. So these are, I call that the pregnancy and postpartum athleticism principle, the PNPA principle, because that is a mouthful. But we look at those 5 variables, and that way I can say, okay, based on where she's at this point in pregnancy, I might need to change her breathing strategy. So if she's somebody who's used to holding her breath all the time, and maybe she's somebody who pressures out into her midline or kind of bears down into the pelvic floor, sends that pressure down, I'm gonna try to cue her breathing and pressure distribution differently. So that might be an exhale coming out of the bottom of her movement. That could be an exhale through the full range of motion. That could be encouraging her, instead of pressuring out into her midline and holding her breath or down in the pelvic floor, to okay, I want you to think about inhaling into your lats, breathe into your lats. So we're taking that pressure higher and wider, away from the midline and away from the pelvic floor. Yes, there's still pressure. We're not going to get rid of pressure. That IAP is part of everything that we do. But we're just trying to move it more strategically, especially when we have a baby and us, we're loaded on the front, and now we're deadlifting or we're squatting fairly heavy in a challenging way. So those are 2 things I'm going to look at initially. I'm also going to look at where she holds tension. A lot of athletes, and we'll use a deadlift as an example, will, when they deadlift, they really kind of shove their hips forward and they hold a lot of tension. They squeeze their at the top, right? And they're doing that for a variety of reasons. Maybe that's just how they were coached. Maybe they have a powerlifting background and they really want to make sure they're locking out and getting that rep. Whatever the reason might be, it's not like a bad thing, but I would really encourage, especially our pregnant and postpartum clients, to not squeeze the glutes and overextend at the top like that, or in a lot of different movement patterns, because that creates a lot of tension on the pelvic floor. And again, our athletes are already really grippy. Women have been sucking into their stomachs from the beginning of time. All of us who are in our 30s, 40s, beyond, we have all been conditioned to you better not have any of your stomach going over your leggings. So we hold tension here even during pregnancy. Anyone who's pregnant listening to this would be like, you know what? I do suck in my stomach, which is ridiculous because there's literally a baby in there, but we still hold a lot of tension in our abs and in our pelvic floor. And if anybody is listening, is sitting down, go ahead and you can stand up. And I want you to suck in your stomach as much as you can and pay attention to what your butt does when you suck in your stomach. Everything grips and tucks under. So again, we can't be reinforcing that over and over in our training, especially when that system is compromised by the growth of a baby or compromised because a baby came out of there. So that's a really important one. Pressure and tension are my big ones that I really encourage my female athletes and those who coach them to dial in and pay attention to, and help redistribute pressure and help redistribute some of that tension, so that they're not reinforcing that really hypertonic, which means tight pelvic floor, because that's where we see a lot of our athletes who experience pelvic health symptoms, is because that pelvic floor is so tight. And if you tell them to do a Kegel and it's already tight, there's not going to be anywhere for that contraction to go. They're already kind of maximally contracted. So most of my female athletes need to learn how to relax, and none of us do that well. So that lengthening, which is where that breathing comes in, is where we can really teach that lengthening on inhalation, shortening on exhalation. And then we move into position. So position can range from looking at posture to looking at their overall form. So that's might be where we adjust range of motion. We might adjust stance. We might say, okay, I want you to think about getting your ribs over your hips, or your body weight more so a slight forward lean, more on your toes, or running an impact cue I really like, especially for my postpartum athletes, is tits over toes. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but you know what? They're going to remember it, and it works, because it takes them from being in this really tucked position when they run or when they land with their butt kind of and hips forward, into the tits over toes, that forward lean position, puts their pelvic floor in a better position to both absorb force and produce force. So again, we have to manipulate position a lot in order to put the pelvic floor in a position to do its job, whether that is lifting 300 pounds, or it's just absorbing the force of a sneeze and you're not peeing. So those are the principles I look at. And the 5th one is movement. And we have to connect all of these different things, that breath, pressure, tension, and position, into any given movement. So we can't tell our runners, well, I just want you to exhale on every single step. That's not going to work. We have to create automaticity. You can't tell a jujitsu athlete or MMA athlete to, well, don't create tension. That's not going to work, right? Because they're going to have max tension. They're going to have max reaction. So it's building a neuromuscular pattern and more awareness of that core system so that then their body is prepared and ready to respond to any athletic demand. That was like a whole dissertation. I need some water now.
That's epic. And actually, I think there was a lot of really accessible and tactical stuff in there. Certainly basic principles. So obviously, for any of the women listening, my guess is this stuff will probably be at least interesting because I think you said there's a statistic. What is it? 85% of women lifetime become mothers, right?
Yeah.
So it's not to make the assumption every woman will, but like statistically speaking. And for the guys listening, there's women in your life, chances are in some capacity, if you ever want to be dads, whatever, like your partner's having kids, this one you're going to want to file away.
Like, and I mean, absolutely. Like, yes, the majority of us are going to be coaching moms at some point in our coaching career. And if not moms, we're coaching women. We have our young female athletes, and we have not been taught as coaches, and we have not been taught as athletes how to train according to our own physiology. And now we are making strides there for sure. But everything I just talked about, breath, pressure, tension, position, in regard to female anatomy and helping them improve pelvic health symptoms or mitigate them from the get-go, that can be taught to a 12-year-old girl. And it should be. It should be taught to female athletes lifting in college. It should be taught to our 22-year-old powerlifters who are like, I'm not going to have a baby anytime soon. I think we need to rethink some of our coaching strategies, some of our, like even like Valsalva. And it's not that there's not a place for it. It's just for some people, and for women in particular, they might need more strategies than what we have been given access to or have knowledge around. And that's okay. We just have to expand our toolbox.
Okay, let's go to scorched earth quote from you. Quote,
okay.
A majority of pregnant slash mom fitness influencers that create content about pregnancy and postpartum do not have experience coaching that population in real life. They often only have experience being that population and use it as an opportunity to sell. Thoughts?
Yeah, shots fired, huh? But this is a story as old as time, especially on social media, is, you have people that there's an opportunity to share on social media and to share your own experience, which is great. Like there's so much to be learned from your own experience. And, as a coach, like we can't be in our own echo chamber of like what we've experienced, because when you are out there coaching in the wild, you're going to get exposed to so many different life experiences and fitness interests and barriers and struggles and wins. And that's what makes you a good coach, is the reps that you're getting by working with other people, not just your own personal. And, we see a lot of people selling and they see this opportunity where, it is exciting. It is exciting to support women through pregnancy and postpartum. Perimenopause, it's having its moment right now. Everyone's wanting to like jump on that, which again, cool. And who's teaching it? Are you all actually coaching that population, or are you seeing an opportunity to market to that population or to even sell to coaches when like, are you actually coaching perimenopausal women? Are you actually coaching women through pregnancy and postpartum? Or are you just seeing an opportunity to sell because that's what's hot right now? And again, this is nothing new. It's just, it's hard because as I think most consumers don't really know who to trust. They don't know where to look. And I think that we have to look beyond follower count. We have to look beyond what this person looks like. We have to look beyond what that person's story is. And this, I'll say, like, what have you done with others though? That part matters. And what are you doing to be a continual learner? Not just a continual seller, but a continual learner. And it's both, right? Like I love selling because selling means I'm getting my workout into this world. That is important to me. It is like a life mission for female athletes to be supported through motherhood and beyond. I'm committed to that. And can do that best by educating my fellow coaches and sharing what I know with the people that are moving the dial the most. And that is the coaching industry. For every one coach, multiple women are helped. So, and we haven't been taught this stuff in our exercise science degrees. We haven't been taught this in our certifications. And I have the ability to teach that. And I want to do that. So I'm all for selling but I think we also have to be in their arena, and we have to have the reps prior to selling in order to actually have impactful work to move the dial in the industry.
As you're saying that, I was thinking about, I'm not saying any names, but there's a guy who's got a abhorrent track record for his personal behavior, who is one of the people that jumped on the menopause train and is marketing himself to women
Yeah.
as some sort of authority on menopause. And some of the stuff he says is egregious. So again, like I say, I'm not saying names, but there's just some abhorrent track record of personal behavior on that one. So
Yeah.
it's the point being is this stuff's out there and then people are jumping on it.
Yeah. And so even if like whether you're pregnant, like, yeah, you have the personal experience, but you need more than that. Or maybe you're a perimenopausal woman. That doesn't mean that you need to now be selling a fitness program for perimenopausal women or a certification program or whatever it might be, just because there's this moment in time. It's like have the reps and credibility actually helping that population first and then sell it. That's all. And you get that credibility by learning, by coaching, by doing, by taking certifications, by going and like learning, by networking, by really narrowing your circle in a lot of ways of like, who can I really learn from? Who's doing this work? And how can I learn with them?
In other words, well, I'm going to plug you. Go check out your media. Here's another quote. And again, this is a bit of that stuff that'll get attention on social media. So, quote,
Yeah.
the fitness industry educating women like, one hand, they say high intensity exercise is bad for your hormones. And then they say you need high intensity exercise. Or long, slow distance cardio will make you fat. But then they'll say, make sure you do zone 2 cardio. And then they'll say lifting will make you bulky and or is dangerous. And then they'll say you're not lifting heavy enough. One more. High impact is bad for your joints, or you need high impact weight bearing exercise. How are women supposed to navigate this crap?
Yeah. It's hard, right? Like that is what, when we think about like our Gen Pop, like for my athletes, they're like, I'm going to do what I want to do anyway, right? But when we think about Gen Pop, it is so confusing, the landscape of navigating this. And then as we get more voices and more research and more information, it still feels confusing because you're like, well, God, am I doing enough? Or like, I'm a CrossFitter, but now you're saying that HIIT is going to ruin my hormones. And now that I'm like, maybe if I'm in my 40s and I'm doing CrossFit, do I have to stop doing CrossFit? Because now it's going to just wreck my hormones. It gets freaking confusing. It gets so confusing. And I think it's hard. Like the more information that comes out, the people that are trying to do a good job of spreading that information, it also gets convoluted by a lot of I don't know. I just feel like it doesn't land the way that it needs to because we've made it more confusing when exercise for a lot of people is just a barrier in and of itself, regardless of what the actual activity is. Like it's hard enough if we're talking about women in their 30s and 40s, a lot of them are in freaking survival mode throughout different seasons during those decades, from pregnancy to early motherhood to kids to then maybe older kids. And you're just like, that's hard. So to make exercise like you're exercising wrong, like that sucks. It makes it really hard for women to know, what do I actually need to be doing? Am I wrecking myself? And they have a lot of outdated advice, or they're inundated with diet culture where like they're not eating a lot, or then they're just, binge eating. And I mean, it's so hard out there for the general population to navigate what's actually going to move the dial for them.
Of the list of these dichotomous things that I
Yeah.
just riffed off that you said, on that list, are there anything you can just discard, like for women not to worry about? For example, lifting heavy.
Well, no, I definitely think that we should be lifting heavy, and heavy is relative. So, what is heavy for you? It should feel challenging enough by your last rep, right? Like, but that doesn't have to be 300 pounds. And heavy, like, like right now, I'm not lifting as heavy as I was 10 years ago, but I'm actually a better athlete now than I was 10 years ago because I'm just more versatile. Like, I'm not lifting heavy because I like to do jujitsu. And I, I don't want to be lifting as heavy because I don't have that time or that interest to be in the gym for as long as I would need to be if I was really trying to work through some heavy, heavy sets. But I'm going to go and I'm going to lift heavy enough. And that's okay. Because guess what? Like you're still strong. You're not just strong for like when you've built that foundation over time, that strength is a gift and it keeps on giving. It is. It doesn't just like go away just because you're not lifting as heavy as you once were. That doesn't mean that you're not still strong and that's not still heavy. It is.
What about things like the intensity of training, the effects on stress, maybe the total allostatic load of someone's experience, and any negative hormonal effects? Because I think that's one of the big fear-mongered things right now. Where's the nuance there?
Well, I think the nuance is also like who and what are all the other factors in her life? Is she training for something? Is she refueling? Is she sleeping? Like, what does the rest of her life look like? And is she doing that multiple times a week where every single day she's like, just exhausted? I think, and then now is she missing a period? Like, we have to look at all these other factors to say, like, is this beneficial for you or is it not? And then are we supplementing with other things? Like, are you also lifting? Are you also walking? Are you making sure that you are eating enough to recover? Are you giving yourself times to recover? Is that part of your strategy too? So, I mean, I'm a big fan, especially working with athlete moms, and that's just sort of like covers a span of this population. But of encouraging versatility instead of being like rigidly identified as a CrossFitter or a marathoner or I don't even know, whatever, right? Like any kind of title, like train for versatility because that will make you better, even in your sport. Like if you're lifting, if you're also able to run, if you can also incorporate some walking into your daily life, a little bit more of that, that's good. I'm a big fan of jujitsu. So I would encourage you to like learn a new sport in your 30s, in your 40s and beyond, to be a continual learner and to use your body in a variety of ways. Like, I don't care if I deadlift 300 pounds again, but I want to make sure that I am in my 50s and 60s and beyond, and I have a high quality of life with my kids and my grandkids. That's what I want. I want to train for this lifetime of athleticism. And that is not about being dogmatic in one form of fitness and how I train or what my body may look like or how my body may perform, but it's the ability to like stay in the game, even as the game changes, because the game will freaking change. How I'm training now is different than how I was training when I was playing water polo. It's so different than my CrossFit and powerlifting and running eras. And now I feel like I've actually finally found a nice balance of like, I get to play and I get that outlet through jujitsu and I know how to defend myself and that's fun. I'm moving my body really dynamically. That's awesome. And I'm lifting and I'm hiking and I can run. I can go out on a 4 to 5 mile run and I feel good there. And I can go take a meeting and do that on a walk. And that feels good to me. Like versatility. I can take my kids skiing or snowboarding and be out there on the mountain. Not very good, but I'm going to be out there. I'm going to try it because I trust my body to perform. We've given it that baseline. And I think that's what we have to really encourage when we talk about like, what does it mean to be an athlete? Like at this point in time, it's just being able to say yes. It's like, yeah, why not? I'll try it because I trust my body to be able to hang, again, stay in the game as the game changes.
I just got thinking about like how you could kick your son's butts at probably a lot of sports, and you could tap them out, you could choke them out if they got out of line, right? Mom's gonna fuck you up if you like
Yeah,
talk
but
back.
they've also been training since they were 4, so they're little badasses. I mean, they have such a life advantage there. So I don't know.
Fair
I
enough.
I only got a few more years maybe before we're really going at it.
What about the high impact stuff? So again, we're taught to fear high impact, and I recently had Susan Niebergall on, and so we got into a little bit of that when it comes to like aging populations, and I think it's probably analogous to the fear about older adults doing
Mhm.
things like jumping and explosive stuff, when in fact those are the qualities that drop off the fastest, and we need to retain them. So, what would you say about fears around high impact activity for
Yeah,
women?
and I'm going to answer this through the lens of fear because they maybe have pelvic health symptoms and they've been told you cannot run, or when they do jump, say they're doing like double unders and they start peeing. So that's a big reason why we have so many women that are afraid to jump, or that's what makes them stop doing high impact is some of their pelvic health symptoms. It's a huge contributor. It's just not really a popular one because I think people are like, oh, well, there's fear, they don't have experience, or maybe they're like more frail people. But I also really think I've noticed anyway that if people have stopped jumping, a lot of times it's because they feel like they can't anymore because they have kids because they don't trust their pelvic floor to respond. So that's a big one. So I think that makes a case for improving your pelvic floor through some rehab and integrating some better strategies and then progressing them, because even if you have symptoms you can still do high impact. It can be different. It can just literally be like learning to absorb force, right? Like just absorbing that force is going to be helpful. It doesn't mean you have to jump on a 20 something inch box. It doesn't have to go there. You can progress to that. So I don't think impact training has to be as scary as we've made it out to be at all. And I think that we can really reverse engineer any kind of plyometric or any kind of high impact so that it meets the person where they're at, and then teach some better strategies for them to, that tits over toes cue. Like I would say, like, I want you to land with your ass behind you, not tucked under you, like land like in an athletic ready position. That's how I want you to land. Suddenly their pelvic floor symptoms get better. So that's where we're adjusting position, for example, right? Like you really kind of over cue that tits over toes or land with your butt behind you. I'm just like over here dancing around like
the Spotify streamers will see you do it, as the Apple people will have like no idea. But
I know I just get so animated when I talk about this, and I feel like I can't explain it without physically doing it. It's a problem. Or even like saying, before you jump, I want you to do a quick exhale on your jump. And then all of a sudden, they're not peeing anymore. And because that exhale helps the pelvic floor co-contract with that diaphragm, right? The exhale solicits a contraction of the pelvic floor. So then gives them a little bit more support from the bottom. So if they're about to jump, they're back here, gonna inhale, exhale, jump. And then they have that recoil of the pelvic floor as they're landing.
I guess we can take this further into bone health as well, right?
Oh,
Tendon
absolutely.
health, bone health.
Yeah, I actually just had a DEXA scan earlier this week, and it was so awesome because it's like, I think I've since learned, since posting on social media, they're just not super accessible for people. But if you can go to a university, for example, or a hospital, if there's any way you can get one, it's so important to know the state of your bone health. And sometimes, they're like insurance won't or you won't get referred to have one until you're in your 60s. But by then it's too late. Like being able to have an idea of the state of your bone health early is so key. We stop, like we're not building bone actively. By 30, we start losing it unless you're actively maintaining it and trying to build it. So, you got to do a lot before you're 30 as a woman to build muscle and to build that bone density. And then after that, it is about maintenance and trying to keep building it. It's just going to be really small increments. But the guy was like, have you been like lifting a really long time? I'm like, yes, I have. It's been a long time. And it's cool to see that. It's cool to see that there's like results showing that I'm doing like an excellent, almost like off the charts category for somebody my age. I'm 38. And it's like, that is a number I'm so happy to see. It makes me like, I don't care about the scale. I want to know that my bones are really strong. That's going to give me the highest quality of life as I age. And that's what it's about. Health from that inside out.
That was particularly helpful because I tend to think of things like DEXA scans and what have you solely through the lens of body fat percentage. And we know that the average error rates are a little high for all measures of body fat. Individual error rates are really, really high. So I tend to discourage people from worrying about their body fat percentage at a moment in time. But that's actually a really good argument for a DEXA scan. It's like, hey,
I feel like it's the most proactive thing a woman over 30 can do to really get an idea of her bone health. And again, I have since learned, since posting that, it's not like, I guess in Canada, it's really hard to get a DEXA scan. But I mean, it also can show your lean body mass, which is really important because I'm going to be like, okay, I want to maintain that. And of course, it says my BMI that I'm overweight, but whatever. Like, I know that is like my bone and my muscle ratio and all of that. It was just important to see, like important data to have on your body. And it's not an end all be all, but it does give you a baseline so that that, like I'm going to be doing that in season and out of season. I'm in my off season right now with competition for jiu-jitsu, but then come summer, I'm going to be in season. So I'll probably be like 5 pounds less. And I want to make sure that when I'm in that season, I'm not really losing muscle either though, even if I've like cut a little bit. And I just want to like have that comparison and contrast. Like that's great information. That's going to be my strategy. But overall, I think women who are really prioritizing their health, who really want to age well, we have to keep a close eye on that because there are just so many things that start to affect us as we get older. Like our hormones are going to change, and that can really affect a lot of different variables. And we have to be proactive with building muscle, and the byproduct of that is having denser bones.
Are there any specific tactics or strategies? Because I keep hearing different things. Like I was of the belief that the popularity growing of rucking, which is walking with extra weight on you, should theoretically improve bone mineral density. Now, I said something like that on social media a while back, and someone got mad and pushed back and said there's no data to support that. I'm like, well, that doesn't make intuitive sense because maybe this is a bad interpretation, but you think about astronauts in space, gravity's not acting on them. Gravity acting on us is a key part of bone mineralization. And therefore, when astronauts come back down, they've been up there for a while, they've lost bone mineral density and muscle mass. So is that a false conclusion that if you walk and do activity under greater load, like a rucking pack, so is it beneficial? What else would be good?
I would absolutely think that's beneficial. And sometimes we're not going to have the exact evidence that we need that we're looking for. But like, you're going to tell me that walking with weight on my body isn't beneficial for my health? It's a cardiovascular workout. My bones are being loaded. It's getting my butt moving, like, how is that a bad thing?
I
And I
don't
think,
think I don't
like,
think it was presented as a bad thing, but someone was pushing back, and I can't remember specifics, but pushing
yeah,
back at the suggestion to do this for bone health, and I'm like, well, that doesn't make any sense to me.
yeah. I mean, I enjoy throwing on a weighted vest and going on a hike. And I think that's beneficial. I would do it. I don't know the evidence for that
Mhm.
exact thing. But again, is it hurting us? No,
I I
like
I, te
I
I
do no
tend to
harm.
think about Yeah, I tend to think about certain things in like if we understand the underlying mechanisms, the biological, physiological mechanisms of things, there are certain interpretations I think are pretty safe. And that to me is one of the ones that's pretty safe.
Right. Yeah,
Right.
there's a lot of other like dumb choices we could be making about our health, but I don't think that's one of them.
Good. And to me, like it's low impact in a sense. And we're talking like, of course, we actually need some types of impact again, like jumping, landing, absorbing, that sort of
And it's
stuff.
a really accessible way for maybe somebody who's not lifting. They're maybe they don't use a lot of barbells in their life.
Mm.
So if you're telling somebody who's maybe in her 50s and she doesn't have a lot of experience lifting, but if she goes out on her walk and she just wears an additional 15 pounds on her, that's going to be a benefit to her. We are loading her body, period.
Oh, this reminds me of something really cool, and maybe you're familiar with it. So, a friend of mine, James Krieger, who I'm going to have to get on here, he's great. He did an experiment, and it was the first thing, and it was our friend Eric Lee Salazar was competing in a bodybuilding competition and ultimately won his pro card. And what they did is they gradually increased a weighted vest. Eric wore this weighted vest all day,
Yeah.
all the way around. But as he dropped weight and body fat during his cut, they incrementally increased the weight of the vest to compensate to basically keep him at the
Yeah.
same, like effectively weight he was walking on. And they were measuring his metabolic rate, and they noticed that his metabolic rate stayed the same because one of the problems was as you diet, as you do
Yeah.
this stuff, your metabolic rate decreases, lower mass, but also, if you're at a caloric restriction, your NEAT, your non-exercise activity thermogenesis goes down. And then, so there was more research on this. So it seems like it's pretty solid that if you actually have greater weight that you're walking around on, you actually maintain base metabolic rate and muscle mass better. And another extrapolation is, and there's some contention over this, I've seen some arguments, people who are carrying around a lot of excess fat, one of the myths is that they're under muscled. Now, I think repeated cycles of yo-yo dieting without resistance training probably causes some problems there. But people who are carrying around a lot of excess body fat for a long time actually have more muscle, right? That's a thing that some people don't realize. So that's further evidence that walking around with that extra weight produces bone. I would assume bone mineralization. I don't know if you get someone who's really, really, really overweight and just how much that stress on bones over time may be a negative or positive. I think we're getting into some murky territory there. But to me, I would think that walking around with weight on you, and I'm not recommending 24 hours with a weighted vest, should actually have a positive effect on bone mineral density and muscle mass.
Again, it makes it easy and accessible for those that aren't maybe lifting as much or are still intimidated, but if we can get them to throw on that 15-pound walking vest, great. Like, great. Again, it's creating more accessibility and encouraging women to be aware of their bone health, because that's not something that the generations ahead of us had as much. Like, they're trying to play catch up right now, like my mom is 65 and she's like a badass little CrossFitter. Like, but it was crazy because when she was in her early 50s, I was like, Mom, you need to start lifting weights. Like, you have to lift weights. You're in your 50s. And now she's like, I am so glad you bitched at me to start lifting weights, because all of my friends are so frail and all of them have osteoporosis and are just, her friend just fell skiing and broke her collarbone the other day. And my mom is like, oh my God, I'm just so glad that I go to CrossFit every morning and I just love it. And and she's jacked. And I'm like, what the hell? This was not the mom that raised me. So it's cool to see, but also again, like her generation, there is such a distinct difference between her lifestyle and her health and those of her peers. And it's been interesting to observe, I guess, from this perspective.
Let's go into that.
Okay.
How did you approach that conversation with mom? What were you seeing? And because I think there's a lot of different interpretations. Some people are totally against any like direct suggestion that someone needs to get active, quote, lose weight, which is a whole another challenging thing. But how did you do that?
Yeah, well, I think I have to provide some context on that first. So, my mom, single mom to my sister and I, she worked a lot to try to raise us and to get us off to college. And so back then, she did not exercise at all. She was really little and honestly just so stressed out, just trying to keep a roof over our head and keep us fed. So, exercise and like health was not part of her life when she was a young mom raising us. And so when my sister and I went away to college, within a few years of each other, she finally was like, I can maybe go on a run. I can, and like I had started doing triathlons, and she was like, well, that seems kind of fun. Like, I think I want to do something like that. So, like, she borrowed a bike, she did a little sprint triathlon, and that just like initiated this light in her. And so she got like really into triathlons and hiking because again, she finally had time for the first time in her adult life. She was able to put herself as a priority because it was survival mode for so long raising my sister and I. So that's why I'll never be okay with the no excuses. I'm like, I saw the hustle that it takes, like a mom to just try to get by and raise us. But then she has totally turned everything around. And she was never unhealthy, but she was certainly unhealthy in the terms of like, she didn't have a lot of muscle on her and she just did not eat a lot, you know? At all, she was so tiny. But then, so she got that triathlon kick for a little while, then really got into cycling because she just loved being on her bike. And I think so much of that was like the sense of freedom, again, for the first time ever. So she really got that hook. And then I know I was going to school for exercise phys. I was learning a lot. And I was like, Mom, like, I think, you've caught the exercise bug. Why don't we introduce some strength training? And I was like, and I think instead of just going to like, no offense to anyone, but like just a bro personal trainer at one of the like big corporate gyms, I was like, why don't you go to a CrossFit? Because I know that they're at least teaching squatting and deadlifting, and they're like, that will be a good environment for you. But she was so intimidated that she could not even call. So I called around to different CrossFit gyms close to her, and I honestly just had to go off of the vibe of the person on the phone to feel like this is where I feel like I can send my mom in good faith and she will be in good hands amongst all the young 20 something year old CrossFit athletes. She's going to be 50, mid 50s, walking into that class with no prior lifting experience. I didn't know she's going to be taken care of. And thankfully, she found a really great CrossFit. And they just totally nurtured her. They loved on her. They taught her to move. And again, she got that same dopamine hit of like, oh my God, I just deadlifted 115 pounds. That's my body weight. I can't believe I can do that. And so she just was like so excited. So I think for her, because of her history, she has such gratitude for the opportunity to do anything. And now, like, she really is. All of our friends laugh that, like, she's way fitter and more active in her life than even we are. And we all work in the fitness industry because she's like, well, I'm going to CrossFit at 7 a.m. and then I'm going to go ski for like 6 hours with my girlfriends. And like, she's in her retired life era, and she just and then that's what she does during winter. And then during summer, she goes and hikes for like 5 miles, and she's just getting to live a really high quality of life because of these small things she did to gradually build up her exposure to fitness and well-rounded fitness as she's aged. And she's also been able to reverse her signs of osteoporosis, and that's been cool to see too.
Now, is there anything there that you could take for the person listening going, well, I'm worried about my parents and they're not as active and it's a hard conversation to navigate? Any tips?
Yeah, and so I guess I never fully got to that. But like my stepdad, for example, is on the opposite end of the spectrum. It's not a huge part of his value system to be really healthy and fit. And I think for some people, it does take an eye-opening like health experience for them to be like, I really got to get my shit together. I mean, hopefully not, but a lot of people aren't going to do it until they feel like they have to do it. I just feel like, especially with that population of people in our parents' generation, it takes sometimes a hard wake up call for them to create change. And I think the best thing that we can do is just be like, hey, like, did you know, or would you like to come with me? Or I'd be happy to like take you to the gym and just show you around. It can feel really intimidating to go to a gym. Here's how you squat. Here's how you can deadlift. Or let's get you some equipment that you can use at home, and I'll help you do that. Or you do hire a coach and you do the vetting for your parents so you know that they're in good hands. So I think it's all in just like how you bridge it, because you can never shame somebody into changing. You can't force them into changing. So you have to like help build that bridge of like, I'll coach you, I'll help you. You can follow this. I will take you to the gym. I will literally hold your hand and show you how to use this machine. Because like that is intimidating. They don't want to feel dumb. Like they are these, successful people that have lived big lives that we only know a small portion of. And so for them to be vulnerable is really hard. For them to feel weak, it's really hard because they've had to work their whole life to not feel weak. So this, if they're like, there's resistance to exercise, a lot of that is just because of like that ego, that self-preservation, and not even like ego in a bad way, just ego in a really understandable way. So we do need to bridge it and make it like a safe way for them to get out there.
And if anybody's really interested in this particular topic, I recently had Susan Niebergall on, and Susan's 65, and she found fitness later in life, and she's Jordan Syatt's kind of partner, co-coach in the inner circle that they do. And she's dynamo. She's an absolute monster when it comes to stuff. And she talks about how she had to have a hip replacement surgery, but how well she bounced back from it. So we talk a lot about that. But I think there's going to be a lot of valuable lessons for someone who didn't yet hear that episode. Go back, check that out if you have, an aging parent or you yourself are in that demographic. You'll love it.
Yeah,
All right.
absolutely.
One last line of questions. Quote, if your cycle is impacted by your training volume, intensity, or nutrition, then that's a sign that your training volume, intensity, or nutrition is not actually healthy for you.
Yeah, I mean, we see that at a really young age with our female athletes that, I was, again, played sports for a very long time on women's teams, girls' teams, and it's almost normalized in some settings. Well, if you're training really hard or you're doing a weight cut or you're doing all these different things, well, it's normal to like lose your cycle. But it's like, maybe that's a common experience, but that's not an indication that you're actually healthy. And now when I start working with higher level athletes and they're thinking about getting pregnant, they're like, I haven't had my period in a long time. I'm like, okay, then we got to do a lot prior to you trying to conceive in order to make sure that you are ovulating, that you do have a cycle, that it is consistent, or maybe you've been on birth control for a really long time. Like there's just different ways to be like our cycle and our digestion are two things that really tell us a lot about the health and the homeostasis of our body, because you can look good on the outside but have like literally be like a shit show on the inside. And I think your digestion, your bowel habits, and your cycle is a really good indication of your overall like the homeostasis of your body, and it's something for us to be.
What about if we extrapolate this into, I don't know if it's the same thing. We've seen a lot of quote research data that suggests that you do not need to make adjustments to your training, like universal across the board, all women recommendations. And what I always say to my clients is that's what the data is saying. I like the idea if you track your own individual experience and if you feel you need to make changes. Now, is this true that let's say someone needs to make changes? Do you think there's still maybe some red flags in some of the total volume of what they're doing, maybe their nutrition, any other lifestyle factors? Or is that just no? It is totally individual by woman, and it might be just something that she individually needs to change, across the month.
Well, I definitely think it is individualized, but it is looking at things like, well, what is her training volume like? And more importantly, like, is she just not eating enough? And so often we are just ingrained to not eat. We will default to not eating and then binging. And so, like, our metabolism just super out of whack. That affects our digestion, and all of that affects our hormones, and that stops the cycle. So it's really taking a hard look at like maybe if it's a one-off occasion, it happens. Like, when I work with fighters, sometimes they'll lose it like when they're in their fight camp. Okay, not ideal, but it can happen, right? But it's what happens after fight camp. Like, how are they recovering? Are they getting their cycle back? Is it really consistent throughout the year? And that's, and if it's not, then we do need to start adapting the intensity of your training, the volume of your training, where your system just isn't as taxed. And we need to be looking at what your recovery is like. And we need to be looking at what your nutrition intake is like. And like really looking at that, because I think even if like if they're not getting enough carbs, or if they're not getting enough fats, like stuff like that, it's not just like, are you eating? Well, yeah, we're eating, but they're eating like such lean foods that it's like they need more substance. They need more substance, and I think that can be hard for female athletes, especially if they're the female athletes that are missing their cycle. There's something going on there.
Thoughts on, I saw a Dr. Sue Kleiner presentation in 2017, one of the first events I ever traveled to, and it stuck with me. And she's worked with Serena Williams, and someone on here may have heard me talk about this before. Women face a dual pressure that I don't think men are subjected to. And if you grew up watching sports, I watch a lot of women's tennis growing up. And the commentators, this is the way to illustrate this. The commentators in a lot of women's sports will make comments about women's appearances in a way they never will with men. So on average, I think it's comfortable to say that women have traditionally faced more pressure to both perform but also look a certain way aesthetically.
Right.
Any thoughts on navigating that for women? And in the context of obviously fueling for performance.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is that's a whole other podcast episode, right? But I think there is a ton of pressure, societal pressure to look a certain way, present a certain way. We see that a lot with getting our bodies back postpartum, or wanting to compete quickly postpartum. Even the pressure that Serena was under to get back, and like she almost died. Like, but then still feeling that pressure to be able to get back into the arena and to look a certain way. And then you are exposed in the media if you're, of a higher profile athlete, where your body is scrutinized, like, oh, she lost her baby weight, or doesn't look like she lost her baby weight, or whatever it might be. Is that person pregnant? Like, oh, no, maybe she's had a freaking burrito. Like, let her eat her burrito in peace. Like, our bodies ebb and flow so much throughout the month. We are already our own worst critic. So to have that be highlighted by exterior forces is really hard. Obviously, social media plays a huge piece into that, where all of us try to like filter what we present as into the world. But I think that we just have to stay focused on sort of like what we talked about earlier, like the data that actually counts. Like for me, that's going to be keeping my bones healthy, my muscles healthy. I want to be doing the activities that I love. And my body has been a lot of different sizes over the last decade, like 2 pregnancies, surgeries, mental health struggles. And that all affects how much fat we carry on our body and what we look like and where we can give mental and physical energy to. There are some seasons where I'm like, I don't have it in me. Like, and I could either like maybe lose a lot of weight because of that, or I could gain weight because of that. And that's like all within the realm of normal experiences for women, even fit women. You don't stay at your leanest and your most cut year round all the time. That's impractical. We will all go through seasons where our bodies are either forced to change, or we finally surrender and just adapt to the season of life that we're in.
I'll share something that oftentimes we don't talk about this about men, and men won't usually admit this, but I mean, it's not uncommon for me to look in the mirror. And I'm a big muscular guy, but I could look in the mirror at different points in the same week. And some days I'm like, oof, I don't like how I look. And then some days I'm like, well, goddamn, like I feel really good. And that's within the same week. And sure, you get like little fluctuations like water and what have you, but it can't be accounted for in terms of like a major shift in how you appear. It's often the filter, the lens through our psychology that we see ourselves at. So I find just even acknowledging that, because I've done enough of it over time to go, okay, cool. It's just a moment in time. It's what my brain is saying. Hang on, Ozzy's making an appearance.
Oh.
Spotify people get to see Ozzy. He doesn't usually come on here very much. And my biggest cat, Ozzy. But that is something I've noticed. So I've learned to be, a bit kinder about it and just kind of, okay, cool. It's just a day. Shrug it off. I know it's not necessarily that easy, but if, I'm dealing with that, everybody probably feels very alone in that. And I assure you're not.
Yeah, no, and I think like that's why I tell a lot of women like track your cycle so that if you're somebody who weighs yourself frequently, I am now because I finally have a not a messed up relationship with the scale and with competing. I like to keep an eye on just like where my weight is sitting. And we make jokes where it's like, well, okay, like you ovulate and you gain 3 pounds. If you're gonna the day or like the 2 days before or the day of you start your period, yeah, you could literally be like 3 to 4 pounds heavier, sometimes more. Like our bodies fluctuate so much throughout the month. I could have a really flat stomach one day, and then if I'm ovulating, well, then it's like I just feel so bloated and just so much bigger. And I'm like, I can't really even suck in my stomach if I want to. Our bodies change dramatically. That does not mean that we are getting fat or that our diet isn't working because the scale is up. It's not like we just fluctuate. We could have had sodium the other like last night, like you're not supposed to constantly be losing weight. And that's been the other aha moment for me within the last few years is like, I used to think weighing myself every day was toxic, but now I like that it actually tells me a story of like your weight goes like this and then kind of just gradually goes down, but it's always zigzagging. Like it's always
It,
zigzag. It'll zigzag in a pattern. Sometimes it might be zigzagging, kind of trending upward. Other times it's going to be zigzagging in a pattern, trending down, or it's just going to be zigzagging, going pretty much straight across. But that was like really helpful for me to get an idea of, and then say like, you know what, like right now I'm not in my comp season. I'm not training as much and I'm not tracking my macros as closely. And like, that's okay. Am I still healthy, fit, and strong and like feel good and look good? Yes. And then when I dial it in a little bit more, I'm doing that for a short period of time. And that's not a sustainable way for me to live, to be like really new, like very hyper aware of my macros or of my weight or of my training. Like, I don't want to give that much energy to my body and my training year round. I got other shit to do. I got a business to run. I got kids to raise. Like, that has to come in doses for me. And figuring that out, like actually creating seasons and cycles within my own training and focuses has been really helpful. And I think that's the direction that we really have to support our female athletes in as they become mothers, as their priorities change, as their interests change. Like, how can we do this in a way that, they're giving the focus they can, where they can, and how they can?
well, let's get you back to your business, your
Yeah.
kiddos. Everybody can follow you. You pretty much have two accounts. So it's at Brianna.Battles on Instagram, and you also have at pregnant.athlete. Are there any other resources you'd like to share?
Yeah. I also have a podcast. It's the Practice Brave podcast. And then I have a lot of different resources on my website, which is the pregnant and postpartum athlete.com. If you are a coach and all of the nerdy things we were talking about earlier with the PNPA principle resonated, I would love for you to go through my certification program to become a pregnancy and postpartum athleticism coach. We have 5,000 coaches around the world that are really providing incredible support, coaching, and resources to their online and local communities. And I'd love for you to join that. So, yeah.
Awesome. It's been a real joy. Thank you so much for this. Obviously, there's so much more depth. I really do encourage people to, at the very least, go follow you, see more of what you talk about. You're very active on social media. And for everybody who may have found this episode via Brianna's media, then the last, at this time, I think it's maybe 16, 17 episodes, has been a major reformat. All the old stuff, over 300 episodes, has been for coaches, career development. You've been a guest in the past, guys. Go scroll back, look for that episode. But the most recent stuff is really geared towards a more broad, general audience. I definitely want to get this in the hands of more people, share it with someone. This type of episode, for sure, there's going to be some people in your life you're going to think of. Share this with them. This gets it in the hands of more people. Check out the other recent episodes. If you like the Athletic for Life theme, Luca Hosvar was on recently, and he talks a lot about that stuff. And the downloads and the feedback from these new episodes has been taking off. It's been incredible. So thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. And Brianna, thank you for coming on.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.